Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the What's in the Pod podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about some films by a filmmaker named George A. Romero. You may remember him from such films as Creepshow, Bruiser, and Monkey Shines. But we're going to talk about some of his more obscure films. Films like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead. Did you say Day of the Dead 2 Contagion?
No, I just said 2 Contagion. You said Day of the Dead.
Well, welcome to our Of the Dead podcast. We will not be talking about Day of the Dead 2 Contagion for obvious reasons, because that movie is a loaded piece of shit. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Michael.
Like a baked potato.
It is pretty bad.
Yep, and I'm Michael, and I'm on the podcast as well.
And, as usual, we are not joined by our third brother, Brad, but he has sent in all of his review scores for all the films we will be going over. So we will try to keep up with that throughout the show. But let's jump right into it with the probably one of the most influential low-budget films of all time, and that is Night of the Living Dead. This is the movie that actually birthed the modern zombie, because most of the zombie films prior to this were more of the Haitian voodoo zombies who were just kind of stoic, non-threatening characters. And this was the first time that zombies actually became flesh eaters and became scary in cinema as we know them today. And it's a movie that is also the birth of many cliches that we see in most zombie films nowadays, where people kind of bored up, they're kind of dumb. They learn that... Actually, one of the things that they do in this movie that I don't think they ever bring back in any of the other films, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is zombies are afraid of fire.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be the case in this movie, but I don't think I've really seen that in many other films. I don't know if they would necessarily be afraid of fire, or just back then they couldn't really do any sort of CGI work because computers really weren't around, and the actors were actually afraid of fire, and there wasn't really much they could do about that.
This is possible. I don't... Yeah, because they kind of have it, because it's a part of the plot where they, like, storm out of the house when they're trying to get to the cars, where they kind of use the fire to make all the zombies back off. But I don't know if that was more of the Haitian zombies that they had in the past for movies like I Walked with a Zombie and, like, White Zombie and all that. I think that was more of a trope that they were continuing off of that, rather than their own... monster that kind of led into films like Dawn of the Dead and all that. So it's kind of interesting, the parallels that they decided not to continue with.
Well, and I think the cool thing about looking at the series of George Romero films as a whole is that, you know, his own kind of opinion and creation evolves along the way, where he kind of starts with something like that, where I guess I could see what you're talking about, where he's kind of evolving his form of the zombie from, you know, other things that he's seen, or that, you know, he caught grasp of watching other movies and stuff like that. But I definitely feel like that's something that's just in Night, and it doesn't carry forward through any of his other films, because I don't recall seeing anything like that as we get further down the food chain. Food chain.
I see what you did there, because they eat people.
It's so funny.
But yeah, it's they do kind of introduce the objects being used in this movie, especially with like the Bill Heinzman zombie, who's I guess the first modern zombie shown on screen. He's the one in the opening scene. And fun fact about Bill Heinzman, just because I personally love this movie, even though it's technically a hunk of garbage, he thought the zombie in the beginning of this movie was so great that it deserved its own spin-off film, and he made that film, written and directed and starring that zombie, and it's called Flesh Eater, and it came out in the 80s, and it's one of those guilty pleasures, and I say guilty pleasure because there is no plot to the film. It's just his zombie roaming around killing people. They introduce characters for about 20 minutes, then his zombie shows up and kills them. Then they move on to the next set of characters for about 20 minutes, and then his zombie shows up and kills them. And it is a terrific experience. But his zombie in the beginning uses like objects like rocks and stuff like that, and there's still a sense of like life to the zombies and thinking, which doesn't really appear in some of his later films until Day of the Dead. Because Dawn of the Dead, the zombies are just kind of like roaming around. They're kind of dumb. And there's kind of a mismatch of continuity in the worlds as they kind of use the zombies as a way to explain different motifs and whatnot about how he views society and how he views the monsters themselves.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely something that's kind of off-putting when you first watch Night of the Living Dead or rewatch it for the 100th time, is when he does bring up I believe it's a rock and he's busting open the window. It kind of strikes you the wrong way, but then again, once you get through the series, it's like it sort of makes a little bit more sense to what they're kind of going to. But yeah, the continuity thing is always kind of intriguing because you never really know which movie would come first, because not a lot of them really touch on what year it is. And I mean, who knows what actual sequence of events could take place, other than, of course, Diary of the Dead, which I think would be kind of towards the forefront, as well as Night of the Living Dead, because nobody really knows what's going on.
I know we're going to get into these movies later, too. I feel like the first 4 movies of his Of the Dead films are a part of the same world. Because Night of the Living Dead starts off the kind of apocalypse, and we're just thrown into the middle of it, and we don't really know what the hell's going on. Dawn of the Dead leads more into like the middle of it, like the crisis going on, everybody knows about it, and everybody's kind of panicking. Day of the Dead, everybody's hunkered down, they don't know who's still alive, and Land of the Dead feels like it was literally made 20 years later. It feels like 20 years in the future is the last remnants of mankind are kind of still alive, trying to build society back with the zombies kind of in the background. And then Diary of the Dead's just like, let's get rid of all that and let's start from scratch and just say, hey, it's all about social media now, and what happens if there's a zombie apocalypse in the middle of that? I don't know if like the last 2 really have anything to do with the original storyline that's actually going on.
Well, I think it has everything to do with the original storyline. It's just different parts of the world that he's telling the story from. And I think that's, he made it more modern, obviously, with the times when Diary of the Dead came out, because you have to capture that audience at the time. I mean, it's still hard to believe how long ago Night of the Living Dead actually came out. I mean, that came out in 1968. Almost. Yeah. It was almost, close to like 40, 50 years before Diary of the Dead came out, and it's like society has changed so drastically, but I still view it as the same setting, the same world, just a completely different part of like the country where it's still going on.
I don't know, it's hard for me to look at it that way, because...
Well, yeah, it's hard to correlate because you've got a movie that came out in 1968 with 1968 style houses, people wearing different clothes, and so on and so forth. But it's a completely fictitious world that we're just now viewing it through a different lens in Diary of the Dead. But it could still very well be that same exact everything, that whole world. It's just it's obviously different because modern technology has caught up to the filmmaking side of things, that just because they're wearing different outfits or buildings are built a different way, they have different cars, doesn't mean that it's not the same exact situation and world that it's coming from.
So in other words, what you're trying to say is Diary of the Dead is the worst one of the series.
No, actually, that's not what I was saying at all, because Diary of the Dead is definitely within my top 3.
Top 3?
Top 3.
What are your top 3 if Diary of the Dead's up there?
Dawn, Day, and Diary.
Wow. I think I legitimately just lost respect for you.
Well, that's too bad, because Night of the Living Dead is actually pretty terrible.
Granted,
it was made
here's
50
the thing.
years ago. It's just a terrible movie. It's so stupid.
I highly respect the film and what it did for the horror genre in general. I highly respect what George Romero accomplished with such a low budget and just using basically pure imagination with him and John Russo creating Night of the Anubis, as it was originally called. A little tangent there. This film was originally called Night of Anubis, which is going back to like Egyptian themes. And they ended up changing it to like Night of the Flesh Eaters. And they got the copyright under the title Night of the Flesh Eaters, but they ended up changing the name to Night of the Living Dead and forgot to copyright that. And that is why this film is now in the public domain, because the film was never copyrighted under its new title. So that's also one of their biggest regrets with this film, even like 40, 50 years later, was that they never actually got the copyright for it. I forgot what I was saying. Oh yeah, this movie itself, though, is one of the only ones of the series that I have trouble kind of going back and rewatching, just because it is very outdated. It still has a lot of atmosphere to it, and there's a lot of kind of creepy elements, like the little daughter that ends up killing her own mother is always kind of a creepy scene to it, but it's not a film that I ever kind of get the urge, like, I feel like watching Night of the Living Dead. But that could also be because we had to do a project in college where we take the first 5 minutes of the movie and we have to do all of our own audio. So my old roommate and I, we did all the voices like, they're coming to get you, Barbara, and all that shit. And we showed it in class. And you can imagine when you have a class of 30 kids watching the same 5-minute scene 30 times, an entire feature film worth of the same scene with different versions of the audio, can get kind of repetitive. So it's hard for me to go back and rewatch this movie because of that and because of the kind of outdatedness. So I can see where you're coming from there, but I can't help but respect this movie for everything that it did and still give it the respect that it earns to be at least within my top 3.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, it's something that set off a generation that has bridged multiple generations of movie-going experiences. But if you really break it down, at least in my mind, it's kind of just subpar and boring. It's definitely not a movie that I pursue watching multiple times throughout the year. It's just something that, if it comes up or if somebody wants to watch it, we'll give it a whirl. But other than that, it sits on the shelf, collects dust, and that's about it.
Would you say that there is dust in your shelf?
Yeah, I kind of feel like I just did.
Get it? Because my name is Dustin. It's a play on words.
Should we start over?
Oh no, I didn't even hit record.
Did you even start the recording?
Call back. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we can continue saying about this movie. But honestly, I think we can move on. I don't have much to say about it.
I think the only saving grace for this film is actually the performance by the guy who plays Ben, Dwayne Jones.
Oh.
He's like the only guy you actually believe is in kind of that situation. A little bit of the dad who comes out of the basement too, because he's definitely got some energy. But
yeah, kind of frantic.
Everything else is just it's just so staged. It feels like I'm watching a play. Like I don't feel like I can get into the character performances and getting trapped in this movie, because it's just, I mean, it's one thing after another where the dialogue is just, it doesn't flow, it doesn't feel. But again, it's a totally different era of filmmaking that maybe I'm just, not in touch with because I didn't grow up anywhere near that time frame.
Well, speaking of the time frame of the film and Dwayne as the leading actor, George A. Romero says in a like the 40th anniversary kind of documentary that they originally were going to cast somebody else for the film. And it was going to be like a white guy, one of their friends. But Dwayne showed up, and he ended up just being a better actor overall, which is obviously shown in the film because he does carry the entire film. and they didn't cast him because he was black for any reason. They didn't even change the script whatsoever. They were in their minds, they were saying, we're just gonna throw him in there and shit, we'll see what happens. Like, who cares? Like, it's the 60s. Like, things are changing in the world, so to speak. But Dwayne was the only one on set who was kind of conscious about the ramifications of him being the lead of this film. Because in the film, he slaps a white woman, and the film...
his slaps are good, too.
Yeah, he beats the shit out of her in the film. And this film was being filmed in the middle of the civil rights movement. And he said to George, like, you realize how this film's going to make me look. Like, I have to walk the streets. If this movie's seen by people, like, there could be terrible consequences to me being in this film. And George is like, yeah, we were kind of ignorant. We weren't really thinking about that. We were just thinking he's just the best actor we can find. And another little fun fact that they were talking about with this movie, when it was actually, they were driving to New York, I believe they said, to sell the film to the distributors. And as they were driving, Martin Luther King Jr. was actually shot. And at the end of this film, the lead character is shot at the end of the movie. And they thought that that was going to kind of be paralleled with what was going on in society and have a very negative effect on them actually being able to release the film. And they were really kind of nervous about that until people started watching it and they're like, oh, it's just a horror film. Like, because there was no actual political reason for the film coming out. The political kind of backgrounds that show up in his films started appearing in his later films like Dawn, Day, and Land, and they're a lot more apparent, whereas this was just kind of like just their first attempt at even filmmaking in general.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
It's a great documentary to check out. And when they were talking to some of the distributors, one of their initial comments were that they're like, this movie's too depressing at the end. Like, you need to have the hero on a horse riding off into the sunset. Like, because that was the kind of filmmaking trope of the era, was that the hero need to kind of ride off into the sunset, and there needed to be happy music, and the audience needed to feel good at the end. They didn't want the main character to get accidentally shot and then just like roll credits. So a lot of people were shocked when this movie came out.
As they should be, because that was an amazing ending. And even in like today's filmmaking, if anybody tried to do something like that, it would be seen as shock, and people would get pissed about it because it's like, oh, you can't kill the main guy. It's like, yeah, you can. It's my fucking movie. Bam. The dude's dead. Makes sense, and it ties the whole story together, or what story there was in that movie.
Well, and what's kind of ironic about it is that's exactly how the next movie we're going to talk about, Dawn of the Dead, actually ends. It ends with that heroic kind of reversal of what you imagine is going to happen when Ken Forey's pointing the gun to his head, and it's like it all seems hopeless. But then he's like, fuck this, I'm going to punch some zombies in the face and survive. I changed my mind. Then they fly off into the sunset, happy music and all.
But I do like that they kind of went 50-50, because this movie really had four main characters, and then two of them died and the other two got off. So I'm pretty much okay with that.
Yeah. Dawn of the Dead is easily my favorite one of the series, and I'm sure you agree.
Absolutely agree. This is probably the only one in the whole series where I could literally watch this every week and never get bored with it for the rest of my life.
I told you, I watched it twice in the same week. Second time kind of on accident, but kind of not. Because I do love this movie. There's something about it, because it's still kind of outdated, but it has this kind of quirky charm to it, which George Romero was really influenced by, like, the horror comics he grew up on, which were kind of like, they show you the blood and the gore, but it's kind of funny and all that, and there's an air of, like, childness to the film that's kind of, like, influenced by all that, which I can't help but just kind of love.
Well, yeah, it's definitely a movie that you can appreciate just about every aspect of it, and I think when I was watching it, one of the best things that you always notice that it's there and it's great, but the soundtrack for this movie alone is just completely fantastic. Because again, it plays towards the strengths of the comedy of the film that, isn't really supposed to be there, but watching it 20 years later, it's almost like, or 30 years later,
40
years later.
Yeah.
It's,
Check your math.
and each decade goes by that I've seen this movie, because I saw it probably for the first time about 20 years ago, is that it was almost Romero's intention that as society grew and modernized, the more you see the comedy of this movie. Like, it was, a serious horror movie back in the day, but it's evolved into something where people can actually look back, appreciate, and still, just laugh at, because it's so ridiculous. But it still probably scared the living Jesus out of everybody that watched it back then.
In that same documentary about Night of the Living Dead, George Romero actually says the only one that he intended to be frightening to its viewers was Night of the Living Dead. All of his other films were meant to be funny. The comedy that you're picking up on was all intentional. It wasn't like I see this coming as time goes by. It's like, no, it was all meant to be funny and quirky as they're throwing pies into the face of the zombies and all that, which is kind of funny because his producing partner, which is actually probably one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, I actually drove down to LA just a few months ago for the opportunity to meet him, which I didn't get to meet him. Long story short, he got tired. But Dario Argento was his producing partner, and they released a cut of this movie under the title Zombie in Europe. They spelled it wrong. They spelled it Z-O-M-B-I, because, Europeans aren't very good at spelling. But they called the movie Zombie over there, and the European cut of the film, which you can find on the Ultimate Edition of the release of Dawn of the Dead, is like 10 minutes shorter, and they have different shots used throughout the film, so different aspects of gore, but the biggest element change is they take away a lot of the humor, because he didn't think it would kind of sit well with the vision that he expected in Europe, which is kind of ironic when we look at it from the theatrical cut in America, which is just full of comedy, and it's the kind of what we all remember the film by the most. Isn't the political message or anything behind it, it's just how fun it is.
Yeah, I don't think I've really explored many of the other versions yet, but I do have that box set you were talking about because somebody bought it for me for Christmas.
You're welcome. And you just reminded me, we forgot to tell Brad's score for Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, we seem to forget that a lot, don't we?
I'm sorry that I've been drinking. Anyways, he, let me look it up real quick. Rustling of the papers, even though I'm making it up as we go. It looks like he gave it a 10 out of 10. He said classic. And he spelled it with a Y. So, C-L-A...
C-L-Y-S-S-I-C. That doesn't make sense.
Actually, he spelled it Z-Z-Y-K. Oh. Like classic. Like, maybe he's saying like sick, bro. Classic. But anyways.
I doubt he even watched it.
As I was watching this movie again, Dawn of the Dead, that is, not Night of the Living Dead. We're past that garbage. I kind of noticed something that they did with the film that I never really thought of before.
They had zombies?
Yes! There was actually zombies in this entire film. I thought it was just the four people, and they were just like fighting the kind of mindless consumers of like people who were just going to go to the mall because it's like, that's all we ever need. No,
Wouldn't
it's
it be,
the
really funny though if halfway through the movie when they're doing all this shit at the mall, like it just turns out that the four of them are on a really bad high, and then they wake up and like there's no zombies, it's just regular people, and they're like doing just weird shit.
Yeah, they're just killing them all.
People with like pellet guns.
Ooh, actually, now that I think about it,
that'd be so funny.
The trope of fire actually comes back in this film. Because they have the little blowtorches. So there is a continuity into this film.
Well, but they don't seem, they're not like afraid of the fire. They just
They kind of are. They kind of like back away from it. Because it's like their way of clearing space so they can get into the different department stores.
I feel like they kind of just burn off their fingers.
Well,
I mean, if we're gonna nitpick, I mean,
But
just
maybe a little bit. I think we can all agree.
eh,
I think we can all agree that Ken Foree is the best part of the movie, and so is Tom Savini as Blades. Boom.
Yes.
End of story.
Tom Savini is fantastic in this movie.
And he did
And-
most of the effects. I don't know if he did them all. He obviously was working with a team.
Well, and the other guy who is amazing in this movie is the other
Captain
guy
Hawkeye in the
Cardi-
beginning, who kind of like looks around like, oh, I got what you mean.
No, that guy sucks.
That guy was awesome.
The guy who's part of the motorcycle
Hey,
gang,
we're going
and
over
he's
we're going
like,
over on a boat.
Everything's just getting all messed
we're going up.
And he
Oh, I get
runs
what you
over
mean.
to the pharmacy and he puts his hand in the fucking blood pressure machine. And he just sits there waiting for it. It's like, what are you doing? There's fucking zombies everywhere.
Well,
and then he gets his arm ripped off, and it's awesome.
That's something that George Romero kind of started doing in his later movies, was just finding fun excuses to kill people and zombies.
Yes.
And he started doing that a lot. And
fun ways.
Yes, in very fun ways. Because obviously there is no reason to check your blood pressure. But I do love after he gets his arm ripped off, it says blood pressure 0, and it starts like beeping at him like,
yeah.
Oh no, that's not good. But
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
he just starts
his
like,
arm just got ripped off, so.
yeah, and they're just making like fun things to do, like fun ways to kill people or fun zombies they can create, like the Buddhist zombie that shows up. He's just kind of like walking around just like aimlessly, and the nun zombie that they have. They're just kind of having fun with it, and you can see it in a lot of his later films that it's kind of like a gag at this point. It's not meant to be kind of frightening. It's meant to be just fun.
Yep.
Yeah. But one of the things that I didn't really think about with this movie, I think I thought about it more on a subconscious level, but the way that death is actually treated in this movie, in the opening scene when they're going through the house or the apartments.
The apartment complex?
Yeah, and they're going through and shooting everybody and getting rid of all the zombies, and it's kind of a metaphor for police brutality and all that. That death is treated with horror. Like, it affects the characters specifically. What the hell's his name? The cop, the main guy who gets bitten. What's his character's name?
Roger?
Yeah, Roger. Specifically with Roger, because like his partner gets shot in the head in the opening scene of the movie, and it's just like he just sees death just sitting in front of him. They go through the apartment complex. They see all these people getting killed, and they end up in the kind of the crawl space area where they have to execute all the zombies, and they're still thinking of them as real people at this point. But as the film progresses, they kind of get more and more desensitized, and as the fun increases in the movie, the characters themselves forget what death is actually like, and to the point where when they're getting invaded by all the bikers and everything, they just shoot them all like kind of willy-nilly, and they don't even think about them as real people at that point. Whereas in the beginning of the film, life still had kind of an importance to it. By the end of the movie, life has no importance. And that's kind of why Ken Foree puts the gun to his head, because he's like, life doesn't mean anything at this point, so if I shoot myself in the head, what the hell does it matter? But he kind of has that change in mind where he's like, I'm just going to go off and, you know what, I'm going to live. Fuck it. Let's see what happens. And I never really looked at this movie from that kind of perspective until I watched it again just recently and tried to analyze it.
Well, I actually feel like the changing of personas in each character is their idea of survival changes from we have to survive as a society and, you know, keep all these other people still alive. Like, even though they turned into zombies, they didn't really know what that meant. They didn't really know what that was. And if you really pay attention to everything that the broadcasters and people on TV are talking about, it's kind of the two sides.
They must be destroyed on sight.
Yeah. Well, then that's the thing. You've got the two sides that are, you know, adherently arguing one another about, you know, their perspective, and that's just kind of how society is. You know, there's always two sides of every discussion or argument, and I think that what the four characters realize as they move on through the film is that their own survival is more important than anyone else's survival. So when they have this motorcycle gang trying to break into what they have, this is their livelihood now, and all they're doing is protecting it. And then once Ken Foree sees that, it's a lost cause, he decides, it's not worth living if, that was as good as it was going to get. Like, we're going to go on to the next place, and it's going to be shitty again. So he didn't want to do it, and then at the last minute, he's like, screw that shit, I'm just going to go punch some zombies.
Well, and also, the film plays on a lot of aspects of consumerism and materialistic kind of viewpoints about life. That's why a lot of the characters, there's so many different montages of them playing like video games, Fran's putting on like makeup in the mirror and all that, and they're trying to live, like they're still going on dates like Flyboy and Fran, and they're trying to live this like luxury life because they have everything in the world. They're living in a mall. They have food, they have clothes, they have TVs and video games and everything they could ever want from a materialistic standpoint, but all the characters just seem kind of empty and distant still. And I feel like that's kind of a strong point of the film that's played up with a lot, especially with lines when they're talking about the zombies. They're like, they don't know why they're still coming here, but something about them tells them they need to come to the mall because it's important in their kind of mundane lives that they keep doing this and keep coming here. And then Ken Foree talks about how when there's no more room in hell, like the dead will walk the earth. And it's like they're basically saying that zombies exist today. We just don't look at them as zombies, but they're talking about how we as consumers are just kind of puppets to the materialistic way of life that we're kind of influenced by, and stuff like malls and Starbucks and everything that's around nowadays.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree with that. And that's definitely something that, strikes a chord in this type of movie, because that's exactly what it's saying, but it's not spelling it out. It's just kind of showing you, oh, this is what you're going to do. If you ever got turned into a zombie, you'd run back into the old habits that you had, as a human being. And it makes you kind of look back at yourself and think, is anything at the mall really something that you have to go and do, or that you have to go and buy? Like, do you need this type of stuff? No, you need to live. You need to live your life and experience.
And that's how you look at a film artistically.
Fartistically.
You made a fart joke.
Yeah.
Well, what else could we talk about with this movie? Because there's
not a whole lot. I mean, we can sort of, we can talk about this movie for quite a bit longer. Did you know that Rhodes is in it? Very briefly. I thought that was kind of cool.
I think I did know that.
Although I didn't actually see him. I was trying to watch for him, but he's somewhere on, like, the dock, I think. And I didn't.
Is he the cockeyed dude? Oh, I go with you, man.
Definitely not the cockeyed dude. You guys have any cigarettes? Nope.
So,
sure don't.
I took a class in school. They call it a J term, so it was like I think it was like 4 weeks long or something like that. Maybe it was even like 3 weeks. But anyways, it was called Zombies in Popular Media. And it was 5 days a week for like 3 or 4 weeks. And we would watch different zombie movies, kind of analyze them, and then we'd have a reading every night that we'd have to do. And one of the stories that we read was written by Stephen King's son, Joe Hill. And it was about two people who were extras on Dawn of the Dead who fell in love. And they were talking about like behind the scenes sort of things, like George Romero and Tom Savini are like trying to pump up the extras who were playing the zombies, like get them excited for filming and all that. And then these two extras all dressed up in zombies like end up catching eyes, and then they end up falling in love on set of Dawn of the Dead. And I thought that was just a quirky little short story that we got to read in that class. Yeah, it was as the kids would say nowadays, dope.
Wow, I don't think kids say that.
I say it, and I'm still a kid at heart.
Yeah, but not in body. You're so old.
That's a poop joke.
What are you, like 20? 22?
I think I'm about like 23 and a half.
You're so lucky.
So, anyways. Bruce Willis's coming out with the movie next week, right?
Willie Bruce?
Yeah, Willie Bruce. He's in the Death Wish remake. You know, the good old Charles Bronson
tell me
film.
about that.
Yes, I did. I told you we need to do a Charles Bronson episode where we do all the Death Wish movies and end it with Bruce Willie.
Can I just send you in my reviews for that one?
No, but Brad sent in his review for Dawn of the Dead. He, looks like he gave it a 10 out of 10. He said the zombies were the best part. And, you know,
I thought you were going to say, making me thirsty.
No, but I am going to make that joke when we get to some of our later films.
Zombies are making me thirsty.
These zombies look like a tall glass of water. Let me tell you something. I'm thirsty. I will be making that joke later. But I think we could move on to my second favorite of the series, which is Survival of the Dead. Just kidding. Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead.
And so
choke on it.
Choke on it. Whenever I'm watching these films, I always write down kind of like little notes or little jokes to go over as we're doing the podcast and kind of developing our voice as a What's in the Pod podcast. And for most of the films, I have like a paragraph of notes and different things to kind of go over and things to talk about. But for Day of the Dead, I only wrote down 3 things.
I know, and you said it to me, and that's all I could think about when I was watching the fucking movie.
So, for anybody of the 6 people listening to this who have seen Day of the Dead, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. I only wrote down 3 things, 3 notes for this movie, and that's Day of the Dead from 1986. I wrote down Mr. Bean, Carrie Fisher, and Jamaican Denzel Washington. Those are the only notes I have for this movie.
I didn't even pay attention to their names throughout the whole movie because that's all I could think about. And I knew instantly who they were.
When I saw this movie as a kid, I was probably like 12 or 13. Because I remember I got the green light, like, you're allowed to watch rated R movies. So I was like, fuck yeah, I'm going to watch everything. So I watched like Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, everything. And even from the time when I was a kid, all I could think about was Mr. Bean, Carrie Fisher, and Jamaican Denzel Washington whenever I was watching this movie.
Now, they're not quite as good, but I also came up with not funny John Goodman and really pissed off Nathan Fillion.
Yeah, those are a bit of a stretch.
It's a stretch, but I just, like, the whole movie trying to watch it, that's all I could think about was coming up with different ones. But yeah.
I didn't even try to come up with mine. That's just what pops into mind when you see these characters. Because I legitimately thought that was Carrie Fisher growing up. I found out once IMDb was invented that it was not. And I legitimately thought that was Mr. Bean growing up. But I found out it was not
Mr. Bean.
When I got older. I just thought it was Jamaican Denzel Washington because it looks just like Denzel Washington from the 80s.
I don't know about that.
It's pretty similar.
More like a malnourished Mr. Bean.
Who? Oh, yeah. The Mr. Bean dude looked like he forgot to eat his beans and became an alcoholic, as he very rightly is in this film. I will do whatever the hell I want, because I know one day there won't be any fucking booze, so I'm just going to keep drinking all the fucking booze till there's none fucking left. That's a quote from the movie that I quoted wrong.
Yep.
But
I did like the way that he said fucking, though, because with his, like, accent, the way he sort of, like, enunciated it, it's pretty funny.
Sounds like it's got power to it.
It did have power, even though he was one of the more squirrely characters in the whole film.
I don't even know his actual name, so let's just refer to him as Mr. Bean. But the Mr. Bean character he's the communications guy. And Jamaican Denzel Washington's kind of the flyboy of this movie. And it's kind of funny how they all interact with one another. Because they have their own little, like, kind of quote-unquote island in the bunker underground. Because they want to hold on to some grasp of life. Because they don't care about science in this movie. And they don't care what the military's trying to do. Kind of go all gung-ho. Let's shoot all 3.1 billion people on the planet that are now zombies. They're just kind of like, fuck it, can't we just enjoy what we have with what little time we have left?
Yeah, and I think they were kind of just, more along for the ride and mainly biding their time. But, they had a strong connection with Carrie Fisher throughout the film as well. So it's, they weren't going to just abandon her, because I think that the two of them knew at any point in time, when it's time to go, it's time to go.
Yeah.
And they had the means of getting out of there, but I don't think that they wanted to try anything without her, because, they had a connection with that character.
Well, and it's, I like the kind of addition of the mad scientist, the Dr. Frankenstein, because Carrie Fisher's
awesome.
Carrie Fisher's character kind of, as she's like the lead of the film, she's the one we follow. She's the one that's kind of the voice of reason throughout the entire film. She's kind of the in-between between the soldiers and the scientists. She's the one that makes the most sense in the film, as she's trying to make sense of both sides of the film. Because you have the military, who really doesn't give a shit about anything. They just want results in a way of, hey, is there a cure? No? Then let's fucking shoot them all. And then you have the complete opposite with Dr. Frankenstein, who's like, oh, there's a cure, and it means individually teaching every zombie how to behave. Which is also just, that's not going to solve anything. It's like putting a Band-Aid on the problem. It's not going to solve your problem. It's just going to be a waste of time. And she has to kind of peruse through both sides to kind of figure out what's actually going on, what's actually feasible, what makes sense, kind of.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember is that, when we kind of start into the movie, the guy who was actually in charge of the military guys had just died.
Yeah.
So we really don't, we're kind of...
You got the power struggle.
Yeah, we didn't really have that, when they had more of a sense of calm. Like, we didn't really get to see that. We just get to see the tyrant Rhodes,
yep,
bossing everybody around, and finally getting to a point where, okay, now I'm in command, and I don't want to fucking do this anymore. I want to, do things my way, kill these, deadheads and all of that stuff, where, beforehand, like, how did they keep the peace? Was it just that, the military guys were under a little bit stricter rules to just kind of do what they're there to do, which was to keep the scientists secure and safe? Or, what could it have been like before that guy died?
Well, I guess that's the big question of the film is, what is it trying to say by putting us in the middle of all that chaos?
Well, I think it's just everyone has a boiling point. When things around you change, you have to adapt to it. And the military guys adapted one way and, kind of basically just said, fuck it, like, it's time for us to start doing what we want to do, because we've been doing what the scientists want to do this whole time, and there's no results for it. And I think that the results that they were shown didn't make sense or weren't feasible to spread out to the masses of zombies that were left.
And just pissed them off even more.
And it pissed them off even more, because now they felt like they were wasting all that time being there.
Yeah.
And it's also hard because all the communications were down, so they couldn't get in touch with anybody else throughout the world, so they have no idea what's going on. They're living in a bunker not knowing what's going on in the world around them. Yeah,
and their only kind of connection to the outside world is in a chain fence.
Correct.
They just kind of...
Although they do kind of explore and, search for stuff in the surrounding areas, which actually leads me to one of the coolest things about the movie.
The opening scene?
Well, the opening scene where they're kind of searching around, and then you get the guy to just go,
Hello!
Hello!
Is anybody there?
Hello!
So, I know that...
I don't know if that guy realized or not, but there were fucking zombies everywhere. You don't need to be shouting when there's fucking zombies, because then they start coming at you, and he actually fucked the whole thing up. And that's why the zombies kept piling on their fence, because that guy just had to keep going, Hello!
Is anybody there?
So stupid. I hated that guy, and I couldn't... Every time I rewatch it, I can't wait for him to die. I wish I could just, fast forward to when he dies and watch the beginning of the movie on with him dead and just not there.
You're a fucking bitch.
And then she sticks him with this stuff, and he's like, starts to go to sleep, and he's like,
you suck.
Go sleepies.
But I know that you listened to this album, but did you ever catch the references in the Gorilla self-titled album to both Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead?
Yeah, it's it's definitely something that they sampled in their music, and I knew about it. And I think it actually, it's been such a long time, and I should have watched it for this week. But in 28 Days Later, when Cillian Murphy is kind of walking around, it almost sounds.
Oh, when he's.
And I want to say it's like an homage to it, but he kind of does the same thing where he's like, "Hello," but of course, he doesn't know that there's zombies and shit around. So it's okay for him to do it rather than McGill to just be like, "Hey, a whole bunch of zombies, let me start shouting. What do you say?"
Hello there, how you doing? Hey, how's it going? But I know you're still a huge fan of it. I'm not a big fan of it, but of The Walking Dead, and
definitely no. Pump the brakes there, sweetheart.
You don't have to hide it from the audience.
In more than a year.
We know that you love Walking Dead.
Slowly but
and
surely
it's okay.
Devolved
it used to be a good show. And
it was.
But Greg Nicotero, who does a lot of the effects for Day of the Dead, he still puts homages in the show to like the early Romero films.
He worked on a lot of Romero's films too,
I know, he's in Day of the Dead. He did a lot of the effects in this one, and he's actually in Day of the Dead, and he gets his throat ripped out during one of the scenes when they're trying to wrangle up the zombies and all that.
Yeah, and I read a funny thing. I think it was on IMDb, but I guess during the lull of their filming and whatnot, he actually took the makeshift model of his own head and like showed it to his mom or something like that and scared her. And that was kind of funny when I read that.
That's kind of funny.
Little tidbit of information. Just shows you how much humor the guy has.
Not at all.
What?
Well.
But yeah, outside of that, I mean, the movies
let's
were
talk
really
about,
good. Definitely my top two.
Let's talk about Bub. Hey, Bub.
There were parts of him that I liked, but there's a lot of things that I actually did not like about what they did with that.
What? Bub's like the most iconic part of the film. And the most thought-provoking of the film.
Yeah,
Even though he's a little cheesy.
The salute is cheesy.
The salute's the best part.
That was terrible. But I love when he gets the gun and he's like, it's not loaded.
Yeah, and he points it at him and he cocks his head back like it's all dramatic.
Yeah, and then he pulls the trigger and then he looks at it and whoa, what the fuck? Should have killed that guy.
Yeah, and then he sees the gun pointed at him and he actually gets frightful.
Yeah, I didn't like that either.
Well,
I didn't like him reacting to stuff like that.
That definitely plays on the next one, in Land of the Dead, even more so than it does in this one, but I think they're trying to keep some sort of humanity to the zombie itself.
Yeah.
And Bub is kind of the only point of hope in the film. Because as they're searching for solutions and they're looking for ways of, should we just go out and survive or should we try to find a cure? Bub is that kind of like hope. And that's just kind of what he symbolizes in the film.
Well, no, yeah, and I understand that. And I think that's great. Because, Dr. Frankenstein puts in the time to teach Bub things and to, show him how to do stuff and gives him rewards. And see, you have to reward him. And then, make sure he's got punishment when he does something bad. But I think that, that's why that character makes sense. What they turn it into in Land of the Dead is just a big pile of crap. Because that's just absolutely stupid.
Zombies teaching each other.
And it's probably one of the movies where most of the zombies I don't like in the film. I actually like most of the characters in Land of the Dead, and I hate all of the zombies. Because they're stupid, and I hate that.
It's funny that you mention that because Our next film is Day of the Dead 2 Contagion. And
this is where I leave and never talk to you again.
And in this film, which I haven't seen in years.
Nope. We're not talking about this movie.
No. I got a connection.
We didn't get Brad's thing.
Not yet. I'm not actually going to talk about Day of the Dead 2 Contagion for very
Unless
long.
you're talking about Day of the Dead Bloodlines, which I want to see. We're not talking about Day of the Dead 2 Contagion.
But in Day of the Dead 2 Contagion, the zombies
still $2 for that movie.
Kind of end up teasing each other throughout the movie. So kind of where in Land of the Dead, they kind of end up teaching each other, like, this is how you use a gun. In this movie, they literally rip the limbs off of each other and hold them over each other's head, taunting each other. Long story short, never watched Day of the Dead 2 Contagion. In my early life, I did a bunch of reviews for a horror site called horrormovies.ca, is a Canadian site. I wrote about 250 reviews for films, and out of those 250 reviews, I only gave 2 movies 1 star, and that was Zombie Nation and Day of the Dead 2 Contagion, which says a lot about that film.
1 star too many.
I couldn't give it 0. Legally, I could not. I'd be in jail right now for the rest of my life.
Worth it.
I'm looking back and tending to agree. But there's a land of consequences if I were to have given that a 0 score. And speaking of lands...
Is it Land of the Dead?
This is our segue into Land of the Dead. And I just want to point out, since we were talking about notes for films, I think I was drunk when I watched this movie, because my first note is John Legwith Salami.
That's not his name.
That's why it's funny. I wrote out John Legwith Salami. That's the first thing I have written on this page when I flipped it over.
Leguizamo.
No, it's Legwith Salami.
Leguizamo. And he is fantastic in this movie.
Oh, he's great. He represents the poor class structure in this dystopian world.
Yeah, because he does all the grunt work, takes out the garbage. Take out your garbage.
And I'm
gonna give me a place up there.
He's guaranteed a spot with the rich in their tower that they created. I like to call that the Dennis Hopper Tower. And
I don't know if they created it as much as they just took it over because it was still standing.
That's true. So yeah, they kind of took it over the quote unquote rich class, and they kind of give this false hope to the poor, like, hey, if you work hard enough, you can get to our level. But once they work hard enough, they basically say, yeah, well, we're still not going to let you in, and we're also going to have you killed.
Yep.
Or
try to be killed, because John Leguizamo is unkillable in this movie.
John Legwith Salami is awesome in this movie.
He just doesn't die.
Yeah, the whole rich and poor aspect to it, because you have the kind of like the cage fighting that they do with the zombies and all that. It's kind of like, what's a good way to say it? Kind of like
terrible.
Yeah, it was kind of cheesy as shit. But the rich kind of like sits in the tower, and they seem very disconnected from the reality of what's actually going on in the outside world. They kind of like try to seclude themselves and forget about what's going on, while the poor is just kind of like going out and fighting for supplies, and they kind of revert to like barbaric styles of entertainment with their little showmanship with pitting people against zombies. And then you have Dennis Hopper just sitting in his tower, literally watching the world burn.
Yeah, but Dennis Hopper is possibly the best part of this movie.
Dennis Hopper is the best part of every movie. Haven't you seen Blue Velvet? Boom.
Yeah, but I've also seen Super Mario Brothers.
We don't... So, did you know... I don't know how true it is, but there's a thing online. Dennis Hopper's talking to his son, and his son asks him, hey, Dad, why did you do Super Mario Brothers? And he said, well, we had to afford shoes for you. And his son says, Dad, I didn't need shoes that bad.
Nope, sure didn't. But he made the movie.
The Goombas! The Goombas!
And Dennis Hopper being amazing. Of all the kills, all the deaths, anything in any of these movies, The best one
The split
is when
hands.
Dennis Hopper shoots that guy in the back.
Oh, look, there's a zombie over there.
Oh, a zombie! Get down! Bam! And then the guy calls him up. He's like, hey, I got dead reckoning. He's like, I probably would have done something that I just did had I known that.
Whoops. My bad.
It's so funny. But he doesn't show any, real emotion when he says that line. And that's the best part. And that's why he's such a terrific actor. Because it's like, oh, yeah, I probably wouldn't have done that. But in all honesty, I don't really give a shit.
It's funny you mention that because I don't know how much acting Dennis Hopper was actually doing at this point in his career. I think he just went so off the deep end psychologically that he was just being himself. They're like, hey man, we're going to point the camera at you. Here's an idea of what the script is. Improvise.
It's called being a natural. Natural born actor. Guy's fantastic.
So
he was great in this movie.
Did Tom Savini reprise his role as Blades in this film? Did you catch that?
Did. He reprised his role as Blade Zombie.
Yeah, he came back as the same jacket and everything, except now he's got a knife in his hand for whatever, or a hook or whatever the fuck he's using.
He had a machete.
Oh, it was a machete. Machete don't text. But
and you know that Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright were in the movie as well?
Yeah, they play the photo op zombies.
Yep.
Fun
And
fact.
Greg Nicotero was in it. I think some other people were in it too, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, one of my crushes growing up was in this film. Asia Argento, Dario Argento's daughter.
Well, that's cute.
She is awesome. She is the, I can't remember her name in the film because I have a terrible memory, but she plays
she really kind of, I know she had a name, but they didn't really say her name that often.
Yeah, she's just kind of referred to, and she is just there being badass and hot the whole movie.
Yeah.
Good old... I don't know if it's Asia or Asia. I'm pretty sure it's Asia, but I call her Asia.
Sure.
But
whatever floats your boat.
It does float my boat.
Well, good.
Floats more than that, if you catch my drift.
I sure do.
I'm talking about a glass of water with ice in it.
I think you're talking about Chihuahua.
Are you talking about the midget dude?
Yeah, that was his name in the movie, Chihuahua. Give me my gun. He's got his little fingers on it. It's so cute.
I do love that scene. After they save Asia Argento from the fighting pit, and the dude with the scarred face has the gun, and he's going through the crowd just following Chihuahua. And eventually shoots him in the head, and it's just like... Pfft.
Yep.
That's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
It's a good scene.
It is a good scene.
It's a good flick. And speaking of all the fun ways to kill people, I think this is definitely one where he explores the fact that he has no boundaries in what he can do. One of the ones that still makes me cringe, and it's just a silhouette type of kill, but they take
two fingers.
The person's hand and they just rip the fingers in half, down the palm and stuff like that. Just rip the hand just clear in half, and that is just so cringeworthy. But it's so amazing because you've never seen something like that before. And then when the zombie starts eating the one person and just bites off the person's belly button ring and then fills up with blood, it's just it's so fucked up, but it's so funny. You never see it. Never see that in any other movie.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know I'm right. And fight me on it. But when you saw this movie, you were actually in Arizona. And I remember you talking about it to Mom and Brad, which we have to get to Brad's score for Day of the Dead. I forgot about that. And you were talking about those scenes with the hand getting split in half. And we were sitting in a Dairy Queen when you were talking about it. And I remember thinking, I need to see this movie. This movie sounds great. Because at the time, I wasn't allowed to watch rated R movies because it's back in 2005. I was just a youngin' at the time. And nobody knew that I was sneak watching movies like Blade 2 and all that. But I remember thinking, like, oh, this movie sounds great. I want to watch it. Like, I need to watch it. And then when I finally watched it, I was like, the scene where they split the hand is in, like, silhouetted black and white. And I was disappointed as shit.
But you should have been.
I was very disappointed. Because I was waiting years to watch this movie just to find that it was black and white. And it was silhouetted out. And it wasn't rated R, blood, mature, gory violence.
The movie was rated R. And
Callback.
Even though it's silhouetted out, though, watching it nowadays still makes me cringe. Because it's kind of fucked up.
That's debatable.
It's like it's one of those things where, like, I really wouldn't want that to happen to me.
Have you seen Salo, the 120 Days of Sodom?
I absolutely have not seen it. I don't know what that is.
If you ever want
like
a cringe-worthy movie, watch that. Trust me, when it's over, you'll have a shit-eating grin on.
Yeah, I'll pass.
You don't know what you're missing out on.
I'll pass.
Yeah, it's not a movie I recommend to the
You just recommended it to me.
The lame man.
I don't get it. Is that French?
No, I'm saying the lame man, like somebody who's lame. Lamg.
Wasn't that in that Philadelphia show? Lame man.
Fighter of the night, man.
God, that show is
champion of the sun.
I hate that show
You're
so much.
a master of karate and friendship for everyone. J-man. Fighter of the night, man. Champion of the sun. You're a master of karate and friendship for everyone. Dayman.
Okay, I just got back. What were we talking about?
We were actually moving on to Diary
Wait.
of the Dead.
First of all, Land of the Dead, great movie. I liked it. It's kind of terrible at times, but you can still appreciate it. It's one you can definitely rewatch.
You're moving on to Brad's score. I see what you're doing here.
As long as, well, we're going to get to Brad's score next. As long as you stop the movie right before the last line of the movie.
What's the last line of the movie?
It absolutely just ruins it when they're watching the zombies and they're like, should we send up some sky flowers? And the main guy goes, no, they're just looking for a place to go. Ugh! Ruins the whole movie.
Cringe-asaurus Rex 2.0.
Keep it to yourself. Just say, nah, let's go. Nah.
You know what would have been a better closer to this film?
Nah.
If he said, like, are they looking at sky flowers? And he said, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Give a damn. That would have been so much better.
That would have been a great ending.
I always stop the movie and I don't listen to that last part.
You know what? Better than that. When fucking Frito wakes up from his coma or whatever, if Sam walks in and he gives him that very fucking gay look, and then he just flat out bricks in Frodo's mouth. Now that would have been an Academy Award winning ending.
And then the kid throws up.
You don't even know what I'm quoting.
Yeah, I do.
Clerks
Spice
3.
Girls reunion tour.
No, Clerks
World
3.
Tour. Spice World. What is that movie
Yeah,
called?
fucking dingus.
A dingo ate your baby. Okay, so Brad's scores for Day of the Dead and then Land of the Dead.
For Day of the Dead, he gave it, and I gotta agree, a 10 out of 10. He says Road to Perdition.
Oh, okay.
But he spelled it like roads, like the character. I don't get what he was getting at, honestly.
Yeah,
with that one.
Like an inside joke that he's got.
Paul Newman was in Road to Perdition, but as far as I know, Paul Newman was never in a zombie film.
It would have been cool if he was. It'd be like Paul of the Dead.
Actually, it would be like Cool Hand Luke, but with zombies. What are you doing? I'm just killing the zombie here, boss. Go ahead, kill that zombie.
Cool Hand Luke, and then in parentheses, but with zombies.
But with zombies. Or
That's a cool hand, Luke. It'd be a shame if somebody just bit it off.
And then for Land of the Dead, it looks like Brad gave it a 10 out of 10. And he said...
Surprising.
He said that the effects were superb.
Effectful.
No, he said superb. I think he meant to spell superb. But, you know, he's a
Maybe
hockey...
he was spelling it and he put the sheet upside down.
He's a hockey coach, not a spelling bee expert. We cannot fault him.
Spelling bee movies. Did you ever see that one I told you to watch?
Which one?
With Jason Bateman?
No, I did see Game Night this morning, actually.
No.
That movie was fucking hilarious. I know what you're talking about because Jason.
Bad words.
Yeah,
Bad words. God,
Jason Bateman directed that movie, if I'm not mistaken.
He sure did.
It was like his first movie he directed.
Yep.
But Game Night is hilarious. I highly recommend it.
Night?
Yeah, Gay Night with Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams.
Gay Night.
Yeah.
Gay.
It turns out Rachel McAdams
like
has a
happy night.
Yeah, Rachel McAdams has a penis, and him and Jason Bateman are a couple, and they throw on a gay night with all their friends.
They're saying game night.
Yes.
It's called game night, not gay night. I was looking up
Oh, whoops.
Something completely different.
Ooh,
not that there's anything wrong with that. I was confused.
Don't Google search that. Things may pop up you weren't trying to find. No, but Game Night's hilarious. They have like a murder mystery sort of game night that they're doing, and things go
A group of friends
wrong.
who meet regularly for game nights find themselves trying to solve a murder mystery. Dun dun dun. Ooh, it's got Danny Houston in it.
It also has the dude from Breaking Bad who plays Todd, and he is
Danny Houston. I just said that.
I didn't know he actually had a name. I just call him Todd from Breaking Bad. That dude is the best part of the movie. Because he plays the creepy neighbor who just divorced his wife and isn't handling it very well. So he's always trying to get invited to game night, and he kind of looks at him like, I see you guys are buying a lot of chips. You having a game night tonight? No, we're just, it's just the two of us.
Did you see this in theaters?
Yeah, it came out yesterday. So why do you guys have 3 bags of chips for 2 people? Well, it was a sale, 3 for 1. How does Frito-Lay make money off of that deal? That dude's the best part of the movie. Just go see it.
Oh,
it's
is it?
Fucking great.
I was looking it up. Is it Jesse? It's Jesse Plemons. That guy is awesome.
Yeah, the dude that plays Todd. He's kind of
totally
like a ginger dude, really pale, but just creepy looking.
Like, I haven't seen Breaking Bad. I've watched
that's your first mistake.
Like the first 2 seasons, and it's terrible. But I've seen this.
Whoa, bro! So Brad
Brad
legitimately was texting me the same thing. Brad was telling me, "Yeah, I'm in the middle of season 2 of Breaking Bad. When does the show get good?" And I'm like, "Bro, just keep watching." He's like,
"No, I texted you that."
No, you did not. Brad texted me. He's like, "Hey, I just got to season 4. This isn't a masterpiece." And I was like, "Give it time." He texted me at the end of season 4. He's like, "This show is fucking amazing." I was like, "I told you, give it time."
It wasn't me.
The show
wasn't me. I don't think I made it past season 3. Got to season 3 and I had to stop because it was just stupid.
Go fudge yourself. So speaking of fudge and terrible things unrelated to Breaking Bad, Diary of the Dead
is amazing.
Is a piece of shit.
What a great movie.
What a shitty movie.
Just a jolly old time.
Would you like to elaborate on how this movie has kind of 3 different tonal qualities to it that all kind of mix match, kind of like similar to The Phantom Menace?
Oh, wow, low blow. But anyways, I think that this movie is great because it has a deaf Amish guy. That was pretty cool. And he has some of like the best kills ever. Because the dude chucks a stick of dynamite and blows up 3 zombies at a time, which nobody had ever done before. And then he sticks a scythe through his own head to kill the zombie behind him.
So not that I'm saying that this was a quote.
Awesome.
Not that I'm saying that this was an actual quote from the movie, but this was an actual quote from the movie. I'm Samuel. Hello. You get what I mean?
Oh, I get it.
That was
I get
fucking stupid.
Well,
The
okay,
the attempt
to be
at
fair,
comedy relief in the
there
middle
are
of a film that
plenty-
tries to take itself so seriously just doesn't
Plenty.
work.
plenty of stupid parts in this movie, but this movie's not serious. That's the thing. You can't take it seriously.
But it takes itself
it's making
seriously.
fun of everybody who lives on social media. The whole main
I
character,
get that.
he's just a giant douchebag because he's like, I have to keep filming so that we can tell our story and help everybody out in the world, and I have to keep filming. Even though there's people dying all around me, all I'm going to do is stand here with a fucking camera. I'm not going to help out, not going to drop a camera, because I got to get this shit on film.
I get it.
No, you're stupid. But I think that some of the characters are great. I think that, they're children in a sense, so they kind of, I give it like a little bit of a pass on the crappy dialogue that you hear pretty much throughout the film.
Horrible dialogue.
But they have proper backstories where they've got families to see, they got places to go.
This movie's dialogue is so bad, it makes Citizen Kane look like Citizen Kane.
So they've got places to go, and they've got like people to see, people to get to, because they're worried about it. Like, what would you do in this situation? You would worry about the people back home, and that's what all of the characters seem to do, except for the old professor guy. He's again along for the ride. He don't give a shit. He's just gonna drink his fucking booze because that's all he does.
I understand if I keep drinking this fucking booze that there won't be any fucking left.
I think that I feel like it's a great comparison, or not comparison, but like a side-by-side to watch with something like Night of the Living Dead, because it still has the crappy acting, but it actually provides plenty of extra story and depth to the characters in this situation as it's all coming about. So it's sort of a way of touching upon and creating a different way to watch Night of the Living Dead. Even though most of it is stupid, I really like this movie. And it has some fantastic kills, too.
Oh, you mean like the totally non-CGI scene where they smash the hydrochloric acid across the zombie's head and it burns a hole in his head?
Yeah, that one is pretty fucking awesome. And I do like, even though it's not a kill, when they take the respirator and zap the zombie's head, then it's like eyeballs sort of like just flood out of its head.
Totally non-CGI, by the way. All practical.
Everywhere. And it's disgusting, but it's fucking cool. The dude's on the night, the bed there in the hospital. He kind of turns over and his like stomach spills out, just like Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead,
kind of
yeah.
Cool. But yeah, I just think it's definitely good, and it's cool when they get to other parts of society when people haven't fully devolved into every man for himself sort of thing. You've got the group of kind of survivors that have all the extra food, they've got weapons, they've got fuel. It gets to a point where they're kind of teetering on, no, you're not getting our shit, we're going to send you on your way or we'll kill you. And they're like, okay, prove it, do it, because we're not leaving without this shit. And he's like, hey, you called my bluff, take some gas, take some food, you can have all that makeup shit too, I don't give a fuck. And then you get the other side of the spectrum, the guy who comes and just robs them and takes all their shit. And that was funny as hell.
What about the weird dude who's like kind of ransacking the, I think it's like an apartment or a hospital that they're at, and he's like, I'm going to call security. Hey, what's over there? Security! And then he runs out.
Security! What are you doing here? I'm taking this fucking TV.
Why was that dude even in the movie?
Because he needed to be there.
Why?
Comic relief. That's what the movie's all about. It builds up to that moment and then comes slowly back to Earth.
Slowly back underground.
Couldn't be topped until you get to, oh yeah, everybody's out back. Oh, your chef's out back. My parents are out back. It's like a fucking goldfish pond back there.
I get that this movie, because it opens up with them saying like, hey, we won't make any of the same, like we want to document ourselves so you don't make the same mistakes that we do. And they kind of juxtapose it with how the media is trying to spin a story by the end of the film where they're like, hey, this is what's going on. It's like, no, the ability of everybody having a camera in their hands allows for voices of the everyday person to come to fruition. And it's it's like if it's not on the camera, it never happens. So we need to record what's going on in our lives and all that. But the problem with that for me, from a filmmaking perspective, is that now they're setting it up as it's all handheld and it's all being recorded. So we get those. And I hate it when films do this. And it's a huge pet peeve when it's all from the perspective of the people recording, and they find those weird excuses to, or as I like to call them, not very subtle ways of editing. And it's like, hey, we got a special effects scene coming on. Oh no, I'm running out of battery. Let's flicker a little bit. Oh, now we're going to do the big effect. And it just feels like they're trying to set up their normal kind of cut to a big effect sequence, but they're doing it in such a way that it's trying to remain fluid, but it's very distracting. And that bugs the living hell out of me about movies like this that are trying to be shot on handheld and happening in the moment, but are so obvious in the way that they're doing it that it's just bad. Like,
and
really, really
I can understand
bad.
that, because that's one of the biggest problems I have with like the movie Cloverfield. I hate that it's definitely set up in that sense. That
every time they pan away, it's a cut, and it's obvious that they're cutting.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel real, and I think that that's part of this movie and why people don't understand why I like it so much. It's not that I like it because I think it's a great movie.
You like it because you like bad movies.
Well, because I think it pairs up with Night of the Living Dead so well that it provides the depth to what's going on, and the depth to, like, it gives you characters that are actually, they feel like they're actually in that situation. And I also feel like it just gives a giant middle finger to people who use social media and put their phones in front of their face nowadays way too much. Because, again, the main character of this movie is a jackass because he doesn't put his camera down for anything, no matter what's going on around him, who's dying, who's getting killed, who he could be helping. He's just so concerned about making his movie and telling the whole world what's going on so he can help all these other people, when it's like, you have people right in front of you that you could fucking help. Put your fucking camera down. Put your fucking phone down. Experience what's going on in front of you. Stop fucking filming it.
I would have to agree and disagree, because yeah, there's some of that, but I feel like the message by the end of the movie is saying that we are kind of like our own news source at this point. We can't trust like CNN and Fox and the people who have an agenda to tell us what's actually going on in the world. Because that's kind of what the movie is kind of saying. It's like, hey, it's spinning it, the whole zombie invasion this one way, but we, the people, are viewing what's actually happening. We should tell our side of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, I think it's not at the sake of losing what you have in front of you. I think that's kind of how I view the movie.
Maybe that's why you like it so much, and I don't.
Yeah, well, I think I'm in a mindset where I view the movie a completely different way. And again, it's got great kills, it's got shitty dialogue, but I like the depth and range that the characters have and stuff like that. That's what I get into, and that's what I get out of for this movie.
You're looking at it as a sister film.
Guy throws a stick of dynamite, kills 3 zombies, and nobody else gets any sort of blowback or gets hurt, even though zombies were like maybe like 5 feet away from everybody. But hey, it's cool.
You're looking at it as a sister film to Night of the Living Dead, where I'm looking at it as a film in its own entirely new universe.
Correct.
Because the universe actually gets continued on into Survival of the Dead.
Which is terrible.
Which I surprisingly liked more than I expected.
Just worst movie I've probably ever put in front of my face.
I'd have to disagree.
Well, that's fine, because the movie is crap. Absolute crap.
Well...
So Brad's score for Diary of the Dead?
It looks like he did not think it was crap, because he gave it a 10 out of 10. And he said...
Somebody agrees with me.
He said... You gave it a 10 out of 10?
No.
I was about to say. Well, Brad gave it a 10 out of 10. And he said... Camera was shaky, but and that's all he said.
Are you sure he wasn't trying to say, Igit, blah?
Say what?
Igit, blah.
What does that mean?
Oh my God, you're too young. Next.
Oh, because you're saying like I, because it's the letter A and then eat.
Yeah,
I get it.
You never saw that show though. What the hell was it called?
What show?
Was the Doctor.
South Park.
No, Seth Green. He had a show with puppets.
South Park.
Show with puppets.
Team America.
Seth Green.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Sesame Street. It's Robot Chicken.
I'm looking for it.
It's Robot Chicken.
Nope.
It's
Was it
Robot
Seth
Chicken.
Green?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. The Bunny Show.
Yeah.
Greg the Bunny.
Yeah, Greg the Bunny.
Yeah.
And the Dracula character would always be like, I get blah. Because he said blah after everything, and he'd say, I get
So
blah.
I always say blah after everything, blah. Oh, so you say blah. Yeah, I say blah, blah.
Blah, blah.
That show was so
blah.
stupid.
That show was dumb. I don't know why I remember that. It just
because the show was amazing.
I get blah.
Buy my book.
So
Buy
Survival
my
of the
book.
Dead. Let's rip off this Band-Aid real quick. Absolute terrible movie. Would never hopefully watch it again, even though I probably will.
Funny story. I actually remember this movie being a piece of shit when I was younger, which is ironic because when I was younger, I remember Diary of the Dead being pretty good. But rewatching them now that I'm more mature and an intelligent human being, I realize that Diary of the Dead actually kind of blows, and Survival of the Dead kind of makes sense. Even though the CGI and most of the kills in this movie are fucking horrible, here's my defense for the movie. And love it or hate it, all you want. This is the last zombie movie that Romero ever made. And this is all that we have to remember him by. And what I remember him by with this movie is I see a filmmaker in his later part of his career having fun. And to me, that's more important than really anything else. Because I'd rather watch a director die happy and having fun than see himself become Francis Ford Coppola.
Well, and I kind of view the film as a form of forgiveness, because you have to remember and understand no matter who in this world you get close to, you look up to, you love, you appreciate, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. This is just a giant pile of mistakes.
I see where you're going with this.
It's terrible. There's nothing good about this movie.
What about the Asian fisherman scene? Boom.
Nope.
Boom.
Nope.
What about the flare gun?
Nope. Because that was so crappily CGI.
I know. That's why it's fun.
The only one that kind of gets close is when they killed the one with the fire extinguisher. Like that
was my next note.
Actually, kind of cool, but still, it's like just CGI, and it looks like
you
just filled him up with like a marshmallow and
the horse being ripped apart at the end for no reason whatsoever.
Awful, made no sense, ruined zombies.
Is that supposed to make sense?
Basically moving forward. They don't fucking eat horses. They don't eat dogs. They don't eat
actually,
squirrels.
we do not know this because we were never shown this in any of his previous films. If they eat animals or not. You're thinking of the Day of the Dead remake where they leave the dog be. But that was never part of the Romero universe, that they don't attack animals. Animals were just never present in the films. Boom. Roasted.
Zombies don't eat horses. Prove that they do. In real life, prove that they do. Go ahead. I'll wait.
Trust me. I'm thinking of the PhD right now, and I have a pH level of +7 in my body, and they're doing something with the quantum mechanics and the quantitative mathematics, and right now it's possible.
What you're saying is that Dr. Frankenstein from Day of the Dead is a terrible scientist who knows absolutely nothing. Because I feel like if it were just as simple as, hey, let's feed these guys some horses or dogs, we would never have gotten here.
Where are they getting horses and dogs? If the zombies are actually killing horses and dogs, where are you getting horses and dogs in that universe?
I feel like they would find
They have alligators because they're cold-blooded, maybe, but they don't have horses and dogs running around.
I feel like they would just find them. They would find them. They
I
would be
don't
places. They would
think
go to those
it's
places and
that
they would find them.
easy.
The movie's terrible.
It does have terrible CGI, but the thing I ended up liking about it was the
ending, because it was finally over.
No, it was the kind of statement with the whole us versus them mentality and the characters that were introduced in the world. The people on the island with their kind of crazy antics, and it's like, I'm an old dude and I do whatever the hell I want. You military folks seem all right because you do the same thing. Let's go kill this dude that you know nothing about because he's the bad guy. I like that kind of dynamic.
Just about anybody.
Yeah.
Because all they wanted to do was kill that guy.
Yeah. They would literally kill anybody in their path as long as they weren't on their side to killing that dude.
Yep.
Yeah.
Movie's dumb.
Movie's actually not that bad.
Next.
Brad's score. It looks like he gave it a 10 out of 10. And he said, survive. That's looks to be all he had to say about Survival of the Dead. I am very surprised because I did go into it again thinking that the movie was going to be god-awful and I was going to have nothing redeeming about it. And the CGI kills are terrible. I'm not going to lie. But there's something about the movie, and also knowing that it's George Romero's last movie that just, I couldn't help but enjoy it, going back and rewatching the movie. And fun fact about George Romero, not really a fun fact, it's actually a sad fact, but it's a happy remembering of him. I was listening to the Movie Crypt podcast, which is Joe Lynch and Adam Green, and they usually have on guests, and they interview them, like people who are in the film making business, whether it's like effects, directors, producers, writers, wherever it may be. And they had a tribute episode to George Romero. And one of the things that they said about George in his passing was that he died in his sleep listening to his favorite album. And I thought that was a very, very nice thing to hear, because George Romero is one of those filmmakers that, as a horror fan and as a low-budget filmmaker myself, and as somebody who looks up to the art in general, in just horror films in general, because horror films have been such a big part of my life, he was a pioneer and he was kind of the grandfather of the genre itself. And it's always sad to see somebody as profoundly important to something that you love pass. But I'm glad that he passed in a what seems to be a very peaceful and poetic manner.
Yeah, no, it's definitely cool to hear that, you know, he went peacefully, and he's the type of person that just seemed to appreciate what he did.
Yeah.
And that's why he continued to do what he wanted to do. And none of his movies ever became, like, mainstream. They all have a cult following because, you know, you find the right audience for what the stories he was trying to tell. And, I mean, us sitting here today and millions of people around the world that enjoy his movies, but
all millions listening to this podcast right now.
Which is nobody. Nobody.
Yeah. I mean, his Of the Dead films, he obviously made other films like we mentioned earlier, like Monkey Shines, Bruiser, Creep Show. Yeah. He made a lot of films, but he's most remembered for
Night Riders.
He's most remembered for creating a subgenre of films, which is not an easy feat because a movie monster really hasn't been created since like Dracula and Creature from the Black Lagoon and the werewolf and all that. So for decades, there was nothing new until he created the zombie. And everything we know about the zombie, shoot him in the head, they must be destroyed on sight, remove the head and destroy the brain, was all created by one man's, or kind of two men's vision. It was him and John Russo who wrote the story together. And after Night of the Living Dead, John Russo actually kind of wanted to branch off to other films. So him and George kind of agreed, like, hey, John, you can take the Living Dead part of the films and continue on with that and copyright it all you want. And that's why George went on with the Of the Dead. He didn't continue like Dawn of the Living Dead and Day of the Living Dead. And John Russo went on to write a story. He didn't do the screenplay. The screenplay was written by Dan O'Bannon, who we all know from such classics as Alien. And he went on to write the story for another prolific zombie film that gave us the Brains.
Split Dogs.
And Split Dogs. And that is Return of the Living Dead. Booyah.
I love that movie.
It is a great movie. It's so much fun.
Oh, not the Split Dogs.
Do you want a party? It's party time.
That movie is fantastic.
Yeah, Return.
Definitely that not many people have seen, but it's definitely rewatchable. There's not a whole lot to it. It's just a whole bunch of shit going on and a whole bunch of people dying, and that's just about it.
And it's fun as shit. And it's punk rock. I'm putting up the metal horns because I'm relatable. But I remember being younger. I think I was probably like maybe 5 or 6 years old. And I think you guys had Ryan over, and y'all were watching a movie, and I went downstairs, and you guys were like, go away, you're not allowed, you're not old enough to watch this. So I was like, okay. But I stuck my head around the corner, and all I saw was a naked yellow man running around a factory. And I didn't know what the fuck you guys were watching, but I knew it was some sort of horror film, and for years, I didn't know what that movie was until I got older, and I was like, holy shit, it's a naked yellow zombie. They were watching Return of the Living Dead. And it was one of those movies that I saw as a child, but I didn't know what the hell you guys were actually watching, but I remember it being kind of silly. And it wasn't like a scary film. I wasn't like afraid of it. I was just kind of like, what the hell's going on? Like zombies are saying brains and they're trying to kill all these people. There's a weird like half zombie on a slab table talking about being in pain. And it was one of those movies that just stuck with me my whole life, but I just never knew.
It's a good flick.
It's a great flick. And that scene when they have the zombie on the slab and they're giving it questions and interviewing it, like, so what's it like being dead? Why do you want to eat people's brains? And she's like, because it makes the pain go away. That's actually kind of a creepy scene.
Kind of a creepy scene?
It's fucking unnerving as shit.
The Split Dogs aren't?
No, the Split Dogs are just
half dogs
funny.
Come alive. That's freaking insane.
That's just funny.
It was pretty funny.
It was.
Not the Split Dogs.
I have to say that this movie has one of my favorite zombies of all time, and it's Stubby.
Stubby.
When they're going out to the paramedic truck and they're trying to see if anybody's survived, and there's just the one amputee zombie with no arms and legs just eating the brains, and then he starts chasing after him and he's stubbing around. That dude's my favorite.
He's pretty funny.
He's the best. And another standout of this movie is a actor who I didn't realize was homeless while he was being cast for this, which was kind of sad to realize, but it's Miguel Nunez Jr., a.k.a. Joanna Man.
Joanna Man.
That dude's awesome.
He's pretty great.
He looks like a tall glass of water. And let me tell you something. I'm thirsty.
He didn't even say that, though.
No, that wasn't until Joanna Man.
Oh,
Which is a movie I only saw as a kid and I haven't watched since, but I still remember that.
Yeah, it's probably best if you don't, though.
I'm thirsty.
Thirsty.
Oh, it's so good. And how about that tank with the very convenient phone number on the front, where it's like, hey, in case of a spill, call the military at this number. This is our hotline.
Did they go in to, like, nuke the place, too?
Yeah, and then that caused an even bigger epidemic because it turned all the zombies into the kind of smoke. It evaporated them into the sky, and then the implication at the end of the movie is like, now it's going to be more zombies. It's going to be more worldwide. And the thing I love about the zombies in this film is they are actually scarier than the Romero zombies because they literally cannot die. Once there's one, there's nothing you can do. And that's a terrifying idea if you think about it.
Yep. It's the same thing that would happen if any sort of chemical warfare started. One single drop of some of this stuff just ruin, take out the whole world.
And then you turn into Saeed
That's
from
some
Planet
scary
Terror.
shit. Saeed. Then your balls fall off.
That too. But another scene that I love in this movie, it's an iconic scene with Linnea Quigley, and that's the graveyard striptease scene. When they're all kind of like dancing around, she's like, "What's the worst way that would die? I imagine being surrounded by a bunch of men and being eaten alive." And she starts ripping off her clothes in the middle of the cemetery and just giving the striptease and all that. I always really liked that scene.
You would.
It was one of those scenes as a child that helped me discover the rising water we were talking about earlier.
Yikes.
If you catch my drift. Ice cubes. But I also like how her character in particular, she's talking about like the worst way she could imagine to die, and that's exactly how she dies in the movie. Just
ironic.
Yeah, completely naked and just like being burnt by all that acid rain and then being eaten alive by a bunch of zombies. That would kind of suck.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I would not recommend it. 0 out of 10, would not recommend. The film itself, though, I'd give it an 8 out of 10.
What was Brad's review on this one?
He gave it a 10 out of 10, and he said, Joanna Party.
Clever.
Yeah. I thought it was more of an 8 out of 10. But 10 out of 10, I could see it. I could see it.
It's a good flick.
It is
I'll
pretty
probably
good.
watch it at some time in the future. Again. And then again after that.
I thought you were about to say that you didn't watch it for this week. I was like, bruh.
Oh, I did not. I haven't seen it probably like 15 years. 16 maybe.
Well, shit.
17? 18?
19.
No, it's been a while though.
How about that scene when they're burning up the body parts? And they're like, "Yeah, we had some sort of like possums come through. Oh, let's just throw them out back. You want to shoot them or burn them?" It's like, at least let us put him out of her misery. You gotta trust me. That's not gonna work out. What are you saying? You just gotta take my word for it. Get a clue, Gulager.
Because of his name.
I've been waiting to make that joke all day. Boom.
Luke Lager.
So, did you watch any other movies this week?
No, I barely finished what we were supposed to watch.
I watched 2 extra, especially since we had an extra week. Not going to say why. Not going to point any fingers either.
Not going to point any fingers, see?
But I actually rewatched Return of the Living Dead 3, which I thought that movie was awesome. I love that movie. Did you ever see it?
I don't think so.
It's really cool, actually. It's like Return of the Living Dead 2 never happened because that movie was a god-awful goddamn piece of shit. And they went straight to Brian Yuzna's Return of the Living Dead 3. And people that know Brian Yuzna know that he loves body masochism in his films, and a lot of people doing like a bunch of like putting spikes through their hands and shit like that, like kind of neo-gothic kind of flair to it. And this film just is full of that, and it's full of just fun shit. And it's really enjoyable for a gorehound such as myself. And the other movie I watched is actually the first trauma film I ever saw, and that is one of my favorite childhood friends, childhood films, Poultrygeist, Night of the Chicken Dead.
That sounds absolutely
fantastic, and it was,
terrible.
and it is. It's a movie where all the main characters are named after restaurants. So you have Arby, Wendy, Denny, and Denny's the best because
Carl Jr.
Yeah, there's Carl Jr. and there's Denny keeps mentioning that his grandmother gave him money to open up this chicken restaurant, but his dream is to open up his own franchise, Denny's.
There's like zombie chicken people.
Yes, it's Night of the Chicken Dead. But Troma is one of those kind of filmmaking distribution companies that I discovered growing up, who's kind of the last of its kind, you could say.
Interesting.
That's all I've got to say about that. Can't really think of much else to say, really.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered it. Not a whole lot else. Like I said, I wish I would have watched 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later, although they weren't really so much zombies as they were.
And they're not of the Dead films. And this week is specifically of the Dead films.
Primo Flight of the Living Dead.
Now that would have been accepted.
Amazingly bad movie.
Oh, I thought you were going to say amazing.
If anybody's ever seen Snakes on a Plane, just replace the snakes and Kenan Thompson with a bunch of zombies, and you pretty much have the same movie.
So replace Kenan with Kel, and you have Flight of the Living Dead.
Yeah, that just about sums it up.
Did we get Brad's score for Return of the Living Dead?
No, I don't think we did, but I think it's pretty safe to say all of our listeners could probably guess.
Wait, I can't remember. Did we? Oh, well, it looks like he gave it a 10 out of 10. And he said, rawr. That's R-A-W-R. Okay. And it looks like his bonus movie was a movie from Japan. It's called Zombie Ass Toilet of the Dead. And it looks like he gave it a 10 out of 10. And he said this movie was fun. Cool. Thank you, Brad, for that.
Yep.
Yeah?
That is actually a real movie, by the way.
It is. I've seen it. And, pun intended, it's pretty shitty.
Hi-yo!
It's really bad. Like, it's not a good movie at all.
That is the tagline on the movie poster.
Yes.
We are going to flush you.
It's a Japanese film, and it's all about fart fetishes. I shit you not. It's bad. Do not watch it. Wink. I had to let everybody know that I was winking there.
Yep. Looks pretty terrible.
It's pretty bad.
We'll very likely not watch that. What are we doing next week?
It makes Day of the Dead 2 Contagion look like still Day of the Dead 2 Contagion, but just slightly better.
Word.
Next week is, we'll say it off the air so we don't spoil it for anybody.
Oh, no spoilers.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. What could it be?
Speaking of which, anybody listening, this episode contains spoilers. Just so everybody knows.
Yeah, we might want to edit that to the front.
No, I don't think so.
If you haven't seen these movies by now, that's just too bad.
There's something wrong with you as a person.
So yeah, this has been fun. Until next time, on the
What's in the Pod? Podcast.
Blown Eardrums podcast.
No, it's the What's in the Pod? Podcast.
What's in the pod?
And that's obviously a reference to the movie Casablanca. Which, if anybody remembers Casablanca, they could not remember what's in the pod.
What was in the box?
Well, that's our episode. Thank you for joining us.